Greetings, bienvenue, aloha. This is Bradford Donald Keller with the final video from the CRS report on Iran. What you see on the screen now is structure of the Iranian government. And at the center of the flowchart, you have the supreme leader, Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and to the left, the Assembly of Experts, which has 88 elected members, and the chairman is Ahmad Jannati. And it says they're pointing toward the supreme leader. And then there's an advisory council called the Supreme National Security Council, led by Ali Khamenei, Secretary General. And then flowing down from the supreme leader, you have the president, Hassan Rouhani. And to the left, the Council of Guardians, 12 members, Ahmad Jannati, chairman. 6 clerics supported by supreme leader. Appointed is what that's supposed to say. I can't, trying to zoom in. 6 legal scholars. And to the right of the president, comes down from the supreme leader, is the commander-in-chief, and that's of the armed forces of Iran, and the joint headquarters, Mohammad Bagheri, chief of staff. Then you have the regular military, and then there's Brigadier General Abdulrahman Musavi and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. We don't have anything really like that, analogous in the West, but there are people that are politically considered loyal to Shia Islam and to the Islamic Republic. And Muhammad Ali Jafari is the commander-in-chief. They receive, I guess the analogy would be the SS armed military divisions during toward the end of the Second World War of the Germans, where they had elite army divisions and Air Force and even Navy, but they were given additional resources and the best personnel. And any organization is really as good as the personnel, so they get the first choice and some of the most motivated, talented people that go into their military. And then it talks about other people. The Quds Force is their elite special operations command and troops who go through years of rigorous training and selection process and maintain a rigorous training regime, and those would be the people, for example, in Syria and Yemen and other places in the world where they send military advisors and resources such as weapons and food, medicine. And then you have the head of parliament. So there's the president, the cabinet, and then a parliament, which is a legislative branch. Then there's something called the Expediency Council, and they arbitrate legislative disputes between the Majels and Council of Guardians. And then they in turn advise back up all the way to the Supreme Leader. So this flowchart is a good resource for anyone trying to get a grasp of the structure of the Iranian government. And similar to France, they have a system that they want stability. They don't want coups and a government, because France had trouble not preparing for the Second World War, where they had different administrations come and go, sometimes only for weeks or months, and then a new administration. They want a more stable government. Obviously, the people in power usually want to stay in power. but it's structured in a way that the Supreme Leader and the Security Council, the top 3 units here, 3 blocks, are quite stable. And even if they're unpopular, or say 80% of the people aren't happy with the government, it's still be very, very difficult to impossible to remove them from power. That's the way it's structured. The same way, like there's real low approval ratings of the French government now, but the police still follow orders and put down the riots. And then the geography of every country is underappreciated now, I think, when it comes to political geopolitics and political economics. Iran has the Caspian Sea here to the north, and here along the Caspian Sea there are resort like luxury communities, the power elites, billionaires in Tehran, and multimillionaires. Many of them have vacation homes here on the Caspian Sea. You have Azerbaijanis here on the border there. You have Arabs here, and then you have this point, Hormuz here. And so much of the world's oil and natural gas flows through this region, if not through this narrowing strait here, even overland. So if there was hostilities, Iran could drive up world oil prices probably to unprecedented levels. It would hurt them as well, but they could do a lot of damage with either commando raids, rocket attacks, sinking of oil tankers, mining the areas here, if their Air Force could get through, airstrikes. So they could really damage and cause the world economy probably to go into a recession or depression if there was a war to break out between Iran and their allies, and Israel, the United States, and all their allies. And when you look at a country like Russia that borders many countries, they're going to have a different. Their whole culture is affected by the geography of the country, and the same with Iran, which has borders with many countries, and it sometimes hostile, sometimes friendly, and they are close to Kuwait and Iraq. Kuwait is a little country, but with incredibly large conventional oil reserves, and they could also disrupt things there as well. I think everyone, like I said before, of goodwill would like to have peace with Iran and prosperity. The reality is there's conflicts of interests. The Iranians tend to look back to past eras when they had empires where their borders were much larger than today. If they weren't actually part of Iran, they had a greater hegemony over the region. And when they watch their TV programs, read novels or comic books, and study history in school, like the Turks, the era when the Ottoman Empire was strong and Europe was relatively divided, and they were strong. The Portuguese tend to like to focus on the years when they had a maritime trading post empire. The Dutch the same. The British like to romanticize maybe about the 1800s, when Britannia ruled the waves and that type of thing. That is seems to be with all countries. When the United States was expanding still and had the cowboys, and some of the West hadn't actually been declared states yet, and they were still territories, and the United States was expansionist, and then going into the Spanish-American War, gaining Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. countries tend to focus kind of on what they consider their golden era, when they were expanding or at their apogee. And I think for Iran, that kind of gives them a little bit of a diluted situation. I think obviously they can be a regional power and influence a weakened Iraq after the war, and dysfunctional Syria with many different players from around the world. Even China has sent in special forces, and of course the United States and big players like Turkey in the area. So it's complicated. If you think of it in a mechanical way, there's many different gears and crankshafts and things turning, and it's always changing. At Tehran, though, in their little bit irrational projection of power into their region, could probably use those resources for things like healthcare, education, transportation, taking some of their most talented military people, and if they were civilians working as petroleum engineers and chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and such, improving their economy and the productivity and efficiency of their natural gas and petroleum, crude oil industries, and power grids and such, large construction projects. So you only have so many talented individuals and so much resources, and both countries, United States and Iran, are diverting a lot of talented people and vast resources into these power plays with each other. I made videos on the amazing energy characteristics and chemical abilities of crude oil and natural gas, that they are critical, vital, crucial, life and death resources, as over 600,000 products are made from crude oil as the feedstock, and 80% of the world's energy is still in fossil fuels, and fossil fuel consumption is growing faster than renewables are being installed. So it's not going anywhere. And the United States sees it as its vital interest to maintain a strong presence in the Middle East. And there's not enough energy and fossil fuels and raw materials and even food for the whole 7 billion, let's say 400 million human beings on the planet. And let's say you have pies, you only have so many pies and so many people, and some people aren't going to get any slices of pie, and then some people are going to get really big slices like the United States. And a lot of this geopolitics, there are shortages and scarcity, which means there's not enough to go around. And how do you carve up that pie? Who gets? There are countries that get almost no fossil fuels and have no running water and have no electricity. If you look at the 50 poorest countries, let's say with more than 1 million inhabitants, there's probably a third of the world's population doesn't have access to good, clean water and electricity, and they have to cook their food with sticks and animal dung and such. So if we were to go and try to have power to all those extra billions of people, like electricity and water treatment and the pipes and the pumps to get them clean water and flush toilets and all that, there just simply isn't enough raw materials. And we're on the decline. Per capita calorie consumption has been declining for over 40 years. And joules of energy used per person is on the decline. And the internal combustion engine and the steam engine allowed large cities such as London, which at one time was the world's most populous city, let's say 100 years ago, to bring in food and resources beyond what you could bring it in using walking with carts or oxen and horses. You could feed the people in large cities with trains, bringing in massive quantities of food and energy such as coal to heat their homes in the winter. And then you could take ships and go even farther afield and bring in fruit in the winter on ships, and rice and tea, and have it year-round. And things like tea, which you think is being quintessentially British with tea time and having biscuits and tea in the afternoon. The tea, comes from India. So you're able to support larger cities and populations of human settlements than you could in the time when you had to rely on sail and traction animals such as oxen and horses. And that is coming to an end. Even in the 1800s, they were thinking to the future. And now we've pretty much exhausted our anthracite coal, and now we're down to bituminous and some bituminous coal, which is 20% or more. Things like sulfur, aluminum, and other arsenic even is in there. And they do filter some of it in some places. In other countries, they have very high smokestacks, and they don't have environmental regulations, and that's why they built the factories there. And the factories need electricity, and it's usually from coal, and they have very tall smokestacks, so it's getting high into the atmosphere and then can circulate around the planet. And we see all types of cancer and lung ailments, and birth defects, and even life expectancies in some places are starting to drop in the more wealthy countries. So as we burn, gigantic quantities of fossil fuels and consume them, they are non-renewable, and we're having to go to lower quality energy sources. And by 2070, every source that I've ever found thinks by then probably 3 out of 4, as much as 4 out of 5 of our mineral and energy resources will be exhausted to the point where if it takes one unit, let's say 1 million joules of energy, and you put that energy, you will get out less than 4 million joules. And you need at least a 4-to-1 ratio on your energy, because you have to process it and distribute it. So it's not good enough just to get 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. You need 1-to-4. And we've already gone below 1-to-4 with our tar sands and maybe with the Venezuelan oil. And it's turned out to be below 4 in ideal conditions, solar voltaic panels. So we've reached a point where we're not getting a very high energy return. And the last of the high return energy, let's say 30, 40, 50-to-1 energy in crude oil, where it's really energy profitable to extract it, is in countries such as Kuwait and Iran, Iraq. And that makes it crucial for the developed countries that have power grids and use trucks to transport their food, and to take the fertilizer and to power the tractors and harvesters and the construction equipment, to have control of that vital non-renewable, non-replaceable resource. And at some point, the stock and bond markets and such, people will realize that we're on the downslope, and smart money and educated, informed individuals will quit participating in a economic system based on a non-renewable resource that's clearly on the, if you look at a Gaussian bell curve, has gone well past the peak and is starting to go down the slope. And you can't go by the prices of energy, because again, governments can create money on their computers, and banks can just by typing on their computers. It's not backed by anything, such as 1,000 kilograms of rice, or an ounce of gold, they can just create money, and they can create money to grant and subsidize those industries that are critical in their estimations. And energy and food are two where they can print money and give it to farmers or give it to energy companies, either in a shadow way or overtly, and just by like granting farmers and paying them a salary type of thing to be farmers. And then that way, if they have a bad crop, they still get their salary. And they can pay those salaries just by creating money in their computers. So I've just had that question asked, well, why don't if we're running out of energy, why don't the prices go up? And it's just because the government is printing, creating money, and it's digital money nowadays, and then just transferring it digitally into people's accounts and corporations' accounts to keep the prices down. That's all I have. Auf Wiedersehen. Au revoir.